February 14th, 2018. Labor struggles across Turtle Island and beyond. Fascists pick on high school students in Ithaca, New York. An underground trash fire adjacent to nuclear waste in St. Louis, Missouri. A rant against conventional love, and calls to confront the Traditionalist Worker Party in Knoxville, Tennessee, on this episode of The Hotwire, a weekly anarchist news show brought to you by the ex-worker, with me, the Rebel Girl. Welcome back to The Hotwire. This week, we bring you a slew of reports from housing and labor struggles across so-called North America and beyond. The assault on Afrin continues, and comrades in Rojava announce a new ecological initiative. We interview a comrade from St. Louis, Missouri, who is active in the fight against the West Lake landfill, where there is radioactive waste buried near an underground trash fire. And yes, you heard that right. Nuclear waste and underground trash fire. In honor of Valentine's Day, we rant against conventional love and for love with no bounds. There are continued calls of support for Tariq Khan and Ramsey Orta, and we give you an update on the Black Pride 4. Listen until the end for calls to confront the Traditionalist Worker Party in Knoxville, Tennessee this weekend. Plus, we have all our regular features like announcements for upcoming anarchist book fairs and the Repression Roundup. A full transcript of this episode with show notes and useful links can be found at our website, crimethinc.com/podcast. You can subscribe to The Hotwire on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for The Ex-Worker. You can listen to us through the Anarchist Podcast Network, Channel 0, or on your radio's dial in Eugene, Oregon every Sunday at 11 a.m. on KEPW 97.3 FM. Believe it or not, every Hotwire is radio ready, so feel free to put the Hotwire on your local airwaves. If there's a story or upcoming event you'd like us to include in a future Hotwire, just hit us up at podcast@crimethinc.com. And now, for the headlines. Delivery drivers who work for Deliveroo and Uber Eats went on strike in several countries. Deliveroo and Uber Eats are both app-based companies profiteering off the gig-based techno dystopia that is threatening to undo decades of strides made by labor struggles. Workers in Hong Kong went on strike in late January, and by early last week, the strike spread to Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, and France, with workers in Belgium occupying the Deliveroo company headquarters for 3 days. As recently as Monday, drivers for yet another service in Bologna, Italy, were inspired to also go on strike. Drivers are seeking consistent hours and wages and aid with transportation. We wish them luck in their struggles. On February 12th, thousands of workers in 24 cities across the country walked off the job. The walkout was organized as part of the Fight for 15 campaign and marks the 50th anniversary of the historic Memphis sanitation workers' strike. Over 120 people detained at the Northwest Immigrant Detention Center in Tacoma, Washington, have launched a hunger strike and work stoppage. The facility has been the site of ongoing strikes, work stoppages, encampments, and protests. The strike is being supported by Northwest Detention Center Resistance, and you can visit their Facebook page, NWDC Resistance, for more information. Additionally, the May 11, 2017 IGD cast, produced by itsgoingdown.org, features an interview with Maru Mora, an organizer active in supporting the strikes. Monday marked the 3-year anniversary of People's Monday, an action that happens every Monday evening in New York City, each week honoring a Black or brown life lost to state violence. Protests gathered in Grand Central Station and then blocked streets throughout the city. In news that can be filed under No Duh, The Guardian reported that California police colluded with neo-Nazis to pursue anti-racist and anti-fascist activists. They report that documents used in the trial of 3 people arrested in Sacramento in June 2016 showed that police expressed sympathy with white supremacists, tried to protect the identity of a neo-Nazi organizer, and worked with white supremacists to identify counter-protesters. This is just one more shred of evidence against the hollow notion that cops are here to protect us in any way. Remember, cops and Klan always go hand in hand. For more insight into white supremacy, The Police and Capitalism, check out Ex-Worker episode 32. And to hear more about struggles against white supremacy and the police, check out episode 40. Turkey is now into their third week of a military assault on Afrin, one of the autonomous cantons of the Revolutionary Democratic Co-Federalist region of Rojava. In response, revolutionaries in Rojava have launched a campaign called Make Rojava Green Again, an ecological campaign striving to heal the land they are so desperately fighting for. There is a link to a video for the campaign in our show notes. For more on the Turkish military's assault on Afrin, check out the recent episode of The Final Straw. And for more background on the revolutionary cantons of Rojava, check out episodes 36 and 39 of The Ex-Worker. Housing struggles are ramping up across Turtle Island, with rent strikes in Cleveland, Toronto, San Francisco, and Minneapolis. Home demos at a slumlord's house in Washington, D.C., active tenant units in Chicago and Philadelphia, and a hunger strike by some of the 85 people evicted during this winter in the Bowery neighborhood of New York City. There's a great feature on It's Going Down about these recent battles. Check it out. Forest activists in Germany have been occupying land for the last month that is slated to be cleared for an expansion of the Frankfurt airport. The Tribürer Wald is now occupied by 3 platforms and a treehouse to protest the climate, pollution, and noise impact of the airport. Last Friday in Canada, 2 spirited warriors shut down operations at a Kinder Morgan pipeline construction site by locking themselves to the equipment. There's a link to a short sub-media video about the action in our show notes. Protesters in Manatee, Florida, held a second march in response to the death of Corey Mobley, who was shot by the police on January 23rd. In Battleford, Saskatchewan, a white farmer was acquitted in the shooting death of a young Indigenous man, despite the fact that Colton Bushey was shot in the back of the head at point-blank range. Rest in power, Colton Bushey. In Olympia, on February 7th, Vanessa Hobson died while in custody of the Olympia police. Upon encountering Vanessa Hobson, police decided Vanessa was having a mental health crisis and needed to be chemically restrained and taken in for observation. Soon after, Vanessa stopped breathing and was pronounced dead. A march was organized later that evening where people angrily stormed through the streets and threw up anti-police graffiti. The march ended in mayhem after a car sped through the crowd, hitting several people. Another motorist pulled a gun on the crowd, and riot police showed up, pointing their less lethal weapons at the march to disperse. This is a prime example of why so many of us abhor the police. Even when they attempt to, quote, help you, they end up hurting you, at times with grave consequences. Rest in power, Vanessa Hobson. And stay safe out there, y'all. Sometimes it can feel like there are adversaries on all sides. Also in Olympia, members of the ultra-nationalist Patriot Prayer Group showed up for a third week in a row to harass patients and abortion defenders at a Planned Parenthood. And for the third week in a row, Antifa was there to greet them. From all appearances, however, Patriot Prayer wasn't really there to protest the clinic, but instead to pick fights with people who don't buy their patriarchal and white supremacist ideas. Scuffles broke out after an American flag was burned. In other Antifa news from the Northwest, Puget Sound anarchists report that Greg Johnson, the editor-in-chief of Countercurrents, a white supremacist publishing house, is living in Seattle. They also report that his gym has kicked him out after discovering his politics. No gyms for Nazis. In Athens in early February, anarchists pushed back against a nationalist rally that attracted upwards of 140,000 people. In the days leading up to the rally, anti-fascists leafleted neighborhoods with texts on anti-militarism and anti-nationalism. There were anti-fascist patrols the night before the rally, and the Golden Dawn offices were attacked. On the day of the rally, a counter-protest took place in the Exarchia neighborhood, with the main focus on protecting squats and occupied spaces from attacks by fascists. And in what can only be a telltale sign of the devolvement of their pathetic movement, alt-right trolls have stooped to picking on high school students in Ithaca, New York. The students were protesting that the role of Esmeralda, a Roma character in The Hunchback of Notre Dame, was cast to a white student. After students publicly objected, both students and the school were then harassed by neo-Nazi scum. And speaking of trash fires, there is a real, actual trash fire underground in St. Louis, Missouri, only a mere 600 feet away from illegally dumped radioactive waste at the Westlake landfill. The EPA recently released a tentative plan to deal with the radioactive waste after years of pressure by the local community. The site is being targeted for cleanup by the EPA as one of 21 of the most toxic sites in the country. We caught up with an anarchist active in the resistance to the Westlake landfill. Can you tell us who you are and what's going on at the Westlake landfill?
I'm from St. Louis, and I've been working on this since the fall of 2015. I started working on it when there was a letter that went out to the school, nearby schools, saying, like, here's our emergency plan, because there's a radioactive landfill that's next to a landfill that's been on fire for the last few years, and they literally are incapable of putting out the fire. And they've said that this fire is going to be burning for the next 5 years, and it's slowly encroaching upon the nuclear waste. All of the waste that's on fire and the waste next to it was dumped illegally, so nobody knows. For the last 5 or 10 years, there's a group of moms that literally call themselves Just Moms STL, which is maybe the best name for a group ever, who have been organizing around this issue, mostly to keep their children and their grandchildren safe. So the waste is from the very first atom bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima. It was uranium that was processed to make that bomb, and it's especially radioactive. It's more radioactive than lots of other uranium. For 20 or 30 years, it was stored behind the St. Louis airport in drums that were just sitting in a field. And then it was moved to another site where they tried to take stuff out of it that was useful. And then from that site, it was dumped in the landfill where it is now, which is an unlined limestone quarry. So radioactive waste sitting on top of water-soluble rock in the Missouri River floodplain, a few miles upstream from where St. Louis City gets their water.
And what's been happening in response?
On the surface, it looks like the things that people are doing are really boring, because what they ask for publicly is that people do a lot of call your congressperson, write a letter to this person, which is not anything that I've ever wanted to do in the last 20 years. But actually what's going on is that these people that really are just moms that were raised as women to not be powerful people have taken upon themselves to try to get nuclear waste out of their community, which is a very challenging fight that they're engaged in. And so people are taking it upon themselves to learn what this waste is, where it came from, really, really complex, scientifically complex things like nuclear physics and engineering and chemistry and epidemiology. So there's a lot of learning that's happening. And then there's also a lot of people taking it upon themselves to watch what's going on in their community and document what's going on in their community, because they understand, in their bones, they understand that the government has no desire to help them keep their community safe. They know that the only way for them to try to have a healthier future for their children and grandchildren is to do it themselves. So there's people that live really close by the landfill. They will go by and see what's going on and take pictures and post it to the internet. A lot of it happens on Facebook. I just saw this truck doing this the other day. Things like that. And it's just constant vigilance. So they're kind of their own security. The other cool thing is that the main group organizing has kind of limited tactics, but there's lots of people that have come to the main group saying, these are our skills. This is what we're interested in. Like, would this be supportive to you? And they're super open-minded to other people's tactics. So there's a group of younger people that wanted to do a lockdown. So they set up a bunch of concrete barrels and locked down to the entrance to the landfill and blocked, and the place where they are is like kind of a weird suburban place where cops have never had to deal with a lockdown. So I think it took them like 12 hours to figure out how to get people to unlock. There's some strategic advantages to being in the suburbs.
What does this all say about the state's priorities?
What I've noticed about what the state's priorities in this situation are is that from the beginning of the development of nuclear weapons, that the state has wanted to do whatever they want as far as their agenda, and that they never want to deal with the consequences. So that's true of the Marshall Islands. It's true of any situation, and it's especially true of this situation. So they created this waste. They created this nightmare that is now killing people everywhere from the age of like fetuses to elders, and causing lots of birth defects and childhood cancers and autoimmune diseases. And then they want to come back and say, no, that's not us. That's not our fault. That's not our waste that caused your cancer. Like, I'm really sorry you're dying, but that's not my fault. So ironically, there's a lot of liberals that want to hold up the EPA as this like amazing agency, and isn't it a bummer that Trump is gutting the EPA? And there's some ways in which that's true, but in this case, the EPA is like the absolute villain, and they literally, for the last 20 years at least, have been coming to public meetings in this community saying, you must be mistaken. I'm sorry you're dying. This has nothing to do with nuclear waste. And in response, people have said back to them, no, this is not normal. We're not dying for no reason. We're not sick for no reason. This stuff has been killing us all along, and more people are noticing every day, and we need you to stop.
Thanks so much for speaking with us.
Don't you hate it when people are in love, they're so...
In honor of Valentine's Day, dear listeners, we bring you these words against conventional love penned by our dear comrade Alanis from The Ex-Worker. I remember reading back in the day, I think it was Emma Goldman who said this, or maybe Crimethinc in the 1990s. Join the revolution, fall in love. Well, sorry, Emma, or whoever, you are wrong. Love has been co-opted even worse than veganism or organic food or the million other things that were once good ideas before capitalism got a hold of them. Especially this time of year. You can't walk 10 feet without being bombarded by some corporation trying to package your innermost feelings and make a killing selling them back to you. If we're not in love the way the movies and commercials tell us we should be, regardless of how rich and fulfilling our lives are, we're supposedly single and should feel deeply ashamed and lonely and incomplete. And if we are in love, we've got 1,000 voices telling us how to tame it, control it, regulate it, manage it, freeze-dry it for the long haul, and microwave it for date night. With, of course, a million products for sale to help us every step of the way. And love comes with tons of gendered baggage, notions of exclusivity and possession and ownership, and plenty of shame for any of our unconventional desires that push at the bars of the cage that supposedly mean true love. So back in the day, we thought that polyamory was going to be the solution. We can let go of jealousy and possessiveness, reject the rigid expectations and boring gender roles, and approach life as a constant adventure into the unknown with fabulous connections of all sorts possible with whomever wants to share them with us. Sounds great, right? But now, even that's been co-opted. On the one hand, you've got a whole industry of books, therapists, podcasts, retreats, high-end sex toys, and pseudo-gurus claiming to have the perfect formula for us to have our romantic cake and eat it too. And what's worse, these days we see people approaching polyamory as if they're just trying to reproduce the miseries of monogamy, multiplied by as many partners as you can fit into your online calendar. Rather than a sense of abundance and freedom, we're filling our lives with dozens of rules and regulations and imposed boundaries governing exactly how we can and can't touch who, for how long, and in what circumstances, and around whom. At least with monogamy, the rules of the game were simpler. Contemporary high-flying poly-life is like an anarcho-capitalism of relationships. Everything is a contract between isolated liberal individuals, with everyone competing against everyone else and nothing certain. You'd better keep on constantly fighting to improve your market share, because there are limitless others out there on the dating apps jockeying for your spot. Traditional marriage is doomed, but it's no wonder people are feeling nostalgic for its more stable and familiar misery. So what do? Say love and abandon ship altogether? Be realistic and shoehorn ourselves into monogamy regardless of our pesky desires? Or sequester ourselves in our room with our cat and internet porn? Here's another way to look at it. Relationship anarchy. I don't mean anything technical or jargony here. I just mean approaching love as anarchists, like we would approach any other question in our lives or our society. So rather than relying on rules and laws and authorities, trusting in ourselves and each other and doing what feels right, provided it doesn't come at the expense of anyone else's dignity or autonomy. Rejecting competition and the scarcity economy and meeting our needs collaboratively, to each according to need and from each according to ability. I'm a prison abolitionist, and that goes for love jail too. Let's never abandon our friends and comrades to stick our head in the sand of our latest fling. Instead, let's channel that consuming passion into the lives and projects we share, loving in ways that strengthen rather than weaken the bonds of community to hold us together. Privatization of resources depletes the commons that we share. Privatization of love depletes the common intimacy that links all of us. So this Valentine's Day, say it with me. Love. Or at least everything that tells us who and how to love, that tries to capitalize on our love for profit, that tries to box us in according to norms set by religion or patriarchy or capitalism, or self-righteous anarchist podcasters, for that matter. Are we anarchists in the streets and hierarchs in the sheets? Do we see regulation and control as unacceptable for prisoners and children and workers and students, but necessary for the people we claim to love the most? Let's celebrate V-Day this year by chucking a big Molotov cocktail through the broken window of monogamy, and then light the dumpster of polyamory on fire and drag it into the street. If we can't be anarchists in the most basic and immediate and intimate realms of our lives, then what the hell are we here for? Like a wacky old queer wrote in a poem a century ago, I am an anarchist. Wherefore I will not rule, and also ruled I will not be. Come on, y'all. Let's live it. Thanks, Alanis. And we have a link in our show notes for the Crimethinc piece, Join the Resistance, Fall in Love, that is referenced at the beginning of this diatribe.
Where did you get this?
Your friendly neighborhood anarchist.
More of an anarchist militant.
People involved in social struggles than everybody else.
People have been waiting for some content.
Radio.
Show.
The Final Straw, and I'm William Goodenough.
And I'm Percy Goodness.
The Final Straw Radio.noblogs.org.
If you're listening, you are the resistance.
It's Going Down is a digital community center from anarchist, anti-fascist, autonomous, anti-capitalist, and anti-colonial movements. Our mission is to provide an autonomous and resilient platform to publicize and promote revolutionary theory and action.
Go to itsgoingdown.org for daily updates. Check out our online store for ways to donate, and rate and follow us on iTunes if you like this podcast.
In this week's Repression Roundup, let's start off with some good news. Joseph Budenberg was just released from prison after serving a 2-year sentence for allegedly releasing thousands of animals from fur farms and destroying breeding records in Idaho, Iowa, Minnesota, Montana, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Welcome home, Joseph. We're glad you're out. Michael Foster, the valve turner who temporarily halted the flow of tar sands oil in TransCanada's Keystone Pipeline in October 2016, was sentenced to 3 years in prison last Wednesday. We'll post an address for him once there is one in future show notes. Ramsey Orta, the cop watcher who used his phone to film Eric Garner's murder by the NYPD, is still in solitary confinement. Orta is in prison due to a campaign of retaliation and harassment by the NYPD. We have his address in our show notes, so you can send him letters, or you can find it yourself at RamseyOrta.com. On Monday, a Franklin County jury convicted 3 of the Black Pride 4 on 6 misdemeanor counts of disorderly conduct and failure to obey. The Black Pride 4 are queer black and trans activists who were arrested at a 2017 Columbus Pride protest of police violence, violence against trans women, and marginalization of people of color within the LGBTQ community. Ripley Bennett, Kendall Denton, and Ashley Braxton will all be sentenced in 3 to 4 weeks. A 4th defendant, DeAndre Miles, is charged with a felony and will be tried separately. We'll report on developments with sentencing and with DeAndre's case in the future. We reported last week that Tariq Khan is in need of support after being threatened, doxxed, and harassed by the alt-right group Turning Point USA. Since November 2016, this anarchist organizer and PhD student has been targeted by TP USA, including death threats to him and his family. Here's Tariq in his own words about some of the harassment he's enduring.
I confront him as a parent who will not tolerate threats against my children. So that's what the conference was about. If even in their video, I don't say anything about their politics. I'm talking about them threatening my children. And I wanted to let them know in no uncertain terms that under no circumstances will you threaten my children. You can criticize my politics all you want. You can criticize me. Nothing about my children is ever to come out of your mouths.
There's a link to the full interview, done by It's Going Down, in our show notes, where you'll also find details of how you can lend your support. Good luck, Tariq. May you keep the trolls off your back. So far, in the J20 inauguration protest case, there have been 6 found not guilty on all charges, and an additional 129 have had all their charges dropped without prejudice. However, there are still 59 folks facing 6 felonies and 2 misdemeanors each. Trials will stretch on throughout the rest of 2018, with the next trial set to begin on March 26th. Supporters are calling for those who can to pack the courthouse throughout the trial. In our show notes, we have a link to an excellent open letter to former defendants, as well as other up-to-date information on how to support the 59 remaining J20 defendants. Additionally, you can stay tuned to @DefendJ20 on Twitter and check out the most recent episode 63 of The Ex-Worker for an in-depth analysis of the first J20 trial. Lastly, we'd like to issue a correction to a report on no more deaths in last week's Hotwire. We incorrectly reported that 9 humanitarian aid workers were charged with felonies. In fact, 8 people were charged with federal misdemeanors for allegedly abandoning property, which essentially amounts to leaving out jugs of water near the border. The 9th person was charged with a felony for allegedly harboring undocumented immigrants. All 9 were arrested within days after No More Deaths released a report detailing how Border Patrol agents routinely sabotage humanitarian efforts in Arizona's desert. We'll keep you updated as details come out. And for an in-depth account of humanitarian solidarity along the U.S.-Mexico border, check out Crimethinc's book, Know All They Can Build, published last year. We have anti-border zines, posters, and stickers linked in our show notes at crimethinc.com/podcast. We'll close out this Hotwire with next week's news, our list of events that you can plug into in real life. This weekend, the Traditionalist Worker Party and other white supremacist groups are converging in Knoxville, Tennessee for a lecture series and a weekend of what they're calling activism and fellowship. The Holler Network and Knoxville Radical Alliance have organized a call-in campaign to the University of Tennessee, Knoxville to pressure them to cancel the event. They're also calling for people to converge at Bueller Hall on campus at noon on the 17th. Follow @Holler Network and @Knox Radical on Twitter for more information. There is a week of action to stop the Bayou Bridge pipeline from February 26th to March 4th. The Bayou Bridge pipeline is the final southern leg of the Dakota Access Pipeline System. Organizers are hosting a conference call tomorrow, February 15th, where you can plug into the week of action. You can check out @NoBayouBridge on Twitter or nobbp.org for more information. On March 3rd and 4th, there will be an anarchist book fair in Hamilton, Ontario. There will be booksellers, zine distros, workshops and theme rooms, ongoing film screenings, an art show, as well as childcare and kids' activities. Go to steelcitybookfair.ca for more information. The Stop Spencer Coalition at Michigan State University has announced plans to oppose Richard Spencer's visit on March 5th. They're encouraging all who oppose fascism to begin making plans to travel to East Lansing for March 5th and make Richard Spencer's visit impossible. In March, folks on the West Coast can expect a J20 Solidarity speaking tour. If you're out west and it's been hard for you to make sense of the J20 case, this is the perfect opportunity to be brought up to speed before the next batch of trials. If you want to help set up a speaking date, email West Coast J20 Tour at riseup.net. From April 6th to April 8th, the 14th Zagreb Anarchist Book Fair will take place in Croatia. For more information in Croatian and English, go to ask-zagreb.org. And on June 16th and 17th, the Malmo Anarchist Book Fair will take place in Sweden. For more info, email anarchistbookfairmalmo@riseup.net. Anarchists in Seattle have already issued a call for a decentralized anti-capitalist May Day there. In their call, they state, whether it's a block party at the Juvie, a march against gentrification in a neighborhood facing mass displacement, or a less public form of direct action, we want to see it all. By spreading our actions across the city and region, we will circumvent the massive police mobilizations that accompany each May Day, giving each action group a broader spectrum of tactics to choose what best suits the participants' needs and goals. The trick to pulling this off is that we need to get organizations, affinity groups, and individuals on board as soon as possible to begin planning their own actions. The call ends by inviting those interested in coordinating May Day actions to contact TIOLEO at protonmail.com. The second annual Institute for Advanced Troublemaking will take place from July 21st to the 29th in Worcester, Massachusetts. The Institute for Advanced Troublemaking is a week-long summer school in anarchist theory and action, open to adults of all ages. The IAT already has a pretty robust list of confirmed courses and facilitators available on their website, advancedtroublemaking.wordpress.com. And thank you, dear listeners, who reached out to us with the correct way to say Worcester, keeping our pronunciation on point. And lastly, our first ever wish list is up at crimethinc.com, entitled What We Need From You. It lists, well, what we need from you. It includes how you can help with speaking events, translation, editing, signal boosting, web design, printing and art, video, and last but not least, technological and written contributions for the X-Worker and the Hotwire. One big ask we have this season is for listeners to reach out to local community radio stations to see if they will carry our show regularly. Go to crimethinc.com to see the full wish list. And to help the Hotwire get played on your local airwaves, send us an email at podcast@crimethinc.com. And that's it for this episode of the Hotwire. As always, thanks to Underground Reverie for the music, thanks to Alanis for the Rant on Love, and thanks to our comrade in St. Louis for the interview. Don't forget to check out all the links, mailing addresses, and useful notes we customized for this episode at crimethinc.com. Every Hotwire is radio ready, so if you want to replay part or all of this show, just go for it. We can also edit episodes down to specific time constraints if you email us at podcast@crimethinc.com. You can also send us news or announcements to include in the future. Stay informed, stay rebel, plug into the Hotwire.